Well, today I want to tell you a story that comes from a long, long time ago. In fact, this story was first written down more than 1,000 years ago, and it was old when it was first written down. And it comes all the way from where I live, from Ireland. It's a story about a king, and his name is Fergus Leite. Now, Fergus was a king, and he lived in a castle, but he wasn't like any of the sort of kings and castles that you think of in stories today. No, he would have lived in a house with a thatched roof that went nearly down to the ground and a wattle and daubed walls. And he would have looked, well, I can show you a little bit about what he looks like, because he would have looked something like, if I can get this open, something like this. I love the way he's done his hair. In fact, the men were always the ones who liked to show off and wear all the best bling and have fancy hairstyles. I think all the women were good looking, the men had to just try a bit harder. I wonder if you can guess how he got his hair all white and spiky like that. It was their favourite hairstyle. No, it wasn't product, and it wasn't even beeswax, which would be sensible. No, he used lime. That's the stuff you make cement with. Boys, don't try it. It's really not a good conditioner. Now, he loved bright colours, and if you were a king, you could wear up to 13 or 14 of the brightest colours you like. Ordinary people only could wear a few colours, and he loved to show off. Now, I think I better tell you a little bit more about him, because there were other things that made him a really unusual story king. You see, back in those days, you didn't get to be a king just because your father was king or your mother was queen. Oh no, you had to be chosen by the people, and they would only choose you if you were very, very special. Now, you had to have very good qualities, the first of which was that you had to be very good looking. Oh, and you couldn't have a single blemish. There couldn't be anything wrong with you. There was a very great king in another story called Nuada, and he had a great battle with his enemy Strang, and he had his hand cut off in the battle, although he did defeat his enemy. Now, even though a doctor called Dienket made him a hand of silver that really worked, he still couldn't be king, because that was a blemish. So perhaps if you were a king and wanted to stay good looking, you didn't want to get injured, but that was no problem. If you had lots of great warriors around you, if you could have a warrior band of your own with lots of show-off athlete-type warriors, and they really were athletes rather as much as fighters. Do you know, some of those warriors in the stories, they love to get up to all sorts of feats and tricks. There are stories about them racing their chariots and then leaping on and off the chariots, doing somersaults on and off while the chariots were going along. There are other stories where they used to leap over the tips of their spears, just landing on the top, and then a bit like pole vaulters do today. Or maybe, there was juggling, and there's one story where they even got bored and set up a tightrope across the roundhouse until one of them fell off and landed on the king, which isn't a good idea in any case. So if you've got all these show-off athlete warriors, they really were as good as Olympic champions and did crazy things, a bit like the snowboarders, you know, see them doing somersaults off walls. Well, they could do things like that off chariots. So if you've got all these warriors together, then you're not going to get injured, and you can keep your people safe. That's one good thing. Good looking and have lots of warriors. Oh yes, and the other thing you had to do, you had to give really good parties for all the important people in the country. The storyteller poets who would tell how good you were. You wanted to keep them on your side, and your warriors, you wanted to keep them on your side too. And if you were going to hold really good parties, you'd need to have a lot of food. So you had to have very important farmers who would make sure that to bring you all the best food. And your top farmer was called the Brugu, and he would arrange your parties for you, your feasts, and make sure you had presents and gifts to give to everybody, like cattle and horses. And then you could invite visiting kings, and you'd be the top king. Because that's another thing I haven't told you. You wouldn't be the only king in the country. I come from a little county called Leite, and in early medieval times there were 4 kings just in this area. So all the local kings were constantly trying to have the best parties, to show off, wear the brightest clothes, and be top king and give the best presents to all the other kings. And so their status would be really high. They would be the most important. And all the other kings would go, I can't give a present that good, so I can't be so important. That's the worst thing that could happen to you. If you stopped being important, your status would go down. That was no good. Everyone would laugh at you, and red spots would come up on your face, and then you wouldn't be important anymore. So to be a king, you had to be rich, you had to give good parties, you had to give good looking, you had to have your warriors. Oh yes, and you had to have a storyteller poet to make wonderful stories and songs about you and tell everybody how brilliant you were. And if a good storyteller poet told a praise story about you, then everyone would believe it. But you had to be careful of your storyteller poet too, because the storyteller poet, if you did the wrong thing or didn't obey the law or did something the storyteller poet didn't like, then they might make a different sort of poem about you called a satire, a blame poem. And if they spoke that blame poem, they'd tell you first, and if you didn't put your fault right, they might actually say it. And if they did, then it was red spots time. Blotches would come up on your face. Everyone would laugh at you, and you wouldn't be important anymore. So you can see, being a king was quite a difficult thing to do. So let's get back to Fergus. Now, Fergus was an important king. He wasn't a top king, though he thought he was, or liked to think he was. And his doom, that's his palace, was somewhere south of where Belfast is today, by a big sea loch. And his palace, his doom, was called Dunrudriga, and it was by the big sea loch, which was called Loch Rudriga. Now, Fergus should have been a really good king. He had rich farmers to make sure he could hold good parties. He had a band of the top warriors. He had plenty of fine clothes to wear, maybe even a cloak like this, which might have been very rare, perhaps red. Or you'd have to trade that. It would have had to have come from the other side of the world, because nobody could dye red like that here. And the trader who brought it and said it came all the way from the other side of the world, from a place called Byzantium, said it was made of a material, a fabric that came from an insect's bottom. But he must have been making it up, unless he was thinking of silk. That was really very, very rare back in the time of our stories, but it would have made our king extra fine. Well, you'd think he had everything, and so he did. And that should have been the end of the story, but it isn't, because Fergus got bored. You know? I'm bored. I've got nothing to do. That sort of bored. I'm sure you never do that. And of course, everyone said, well, have another party, Fergus. Blech, don't want another party. Well, why not get your warriors to do some fancy feats, leaping on and off the chariots? Oh, saw that yesterday. Well, how about some horse races? We did that last week. Well, Fergus was so bored that what he did was went for a walk on the beach by the great sea loch, Loch Rudriga. And it must have been a fine day like it is today, and he fell asleep on the beach. Now, back in those days, people used to think the sea was a very magical place, and a very magical place it still is. But not for the same reason. You see, nowadays we have submarines and we have scuba diving equipment, and it's very easy to take cameras down to the bottom of the sea and see all the strange creatures that live at the bottom, or find wrecks with buried treasure, but not in those days. I don't know whether you've ever looked into deep water, and if you look down with all the weaving wavy waterweed and the reflections and ripples on the water, it does look as if you're looking into a strange and other world. And that's what they thought back in those days. They thought that if you could go to the bottom of the sea, you'd find another world down there. It was a world called the world of land under wave, and it was there that all the treasure in the world was kept. And I'm not talking about sunken treasure, gold, silver, pearls, or even pirate treasure. Oh no, I'm thinking about magic treasure, superhero treasure. Now, I don't know whether there's any superhero treasure you would like to find. Maybe something like Thor's hammer. Well, if you were looking for Thor's hammer, you'd have to go to Land Under Wave. Or what about, I know, Harry Potter's cloak of invisibility? Well, there was only one place you'd find that, and that would be Land Under Wave. Or maybe, the Infinity Gauntlet. Who knows, maybe that was Land Under Wave as well. For that was where all the treasure in the world was kept. Now, Fergus wasn't thinking about treasure when he fell asleep on the beach. He also didn't know that in Land Under Wave, in fact, under Loch Rudriger, there were a race of small warriors. Now, they were very, very short, but they were extremely, very fierce. In fact, they used to carry spears and swords, and they wore helmets. But the main trouble with these very small warriors was they had horrible sense of humour. Look, I'll show you what I mean. Just imagine here we have Fergus asleep on the beach, and two of the little people, they're called Luba Corn, but don't get the ideas about they were fierce. Two of these little warriors came out of the sea, and one of them saw Fergus asleep on the beach and went, "Ha ha, there's Fergus. I know, why don't we play a trick on him? Look, you grab his head, I'll grab his feet, and we'll pull him under the water. Won't it be a great joke when he wakes up at the bottom of the sea, drowned?" Now, that's not a funny joke. You don't usually wake up if you've been drowned, but that didn't bother the two little warriors, and they began to drag him under the water. Well, fortunately for Fergus, the water around Ireland is always cold. And it woke Fergus up, and he flailed around, and one of the Luba Corn got away, and he just managed to grab the other one. Now, if you caught an enemy, you could let the enemy go. You could give the enemy back his life. But your enemy, to get his life back, had to give you 3 wishes, or maybe the wish of your heart. Often 3 wishes if it was said all in one breath. But they had to give you a boon, something you really wanted. So Fergus said to the Luba Corn, "What are you going to give me if I let you go?" "Oh, your heart's desire," said the Luba Corn. "I come from land under wave, I can give you anything." Well, now he could ask for the Infinity Gauntlet, Thor's hammer, cloak of invisibility, anything you like, sword of strength, helmet of protection, I don't know, a wand of shape-shifting, whatever you like. Well, Fergus thought about it, and he had a great idea. And he said, "I want you to give me something that will allow me to walk at the bottom of every river, every stream, and every sea, and something that will let me breathe underwater." Can you think why he's chosen that and not something magical like a cloak of invisibility? You're right. Because if he's got something which will allow him to walk on the bottom of every sea and to breathe underwater, he can go and get as many treasures as he wants. You see, Fergus is clever. Kings have to be clever. Well, the Luba Corn said, "All right, you can have that. I'll tell you what, I'll give you this." And what he handed him was, here it is, a bunch of old dried herbs. "What do I do with this?" said Fergus, asked at the Luba Corn. "You stick 'em in your ears." Well, don't try it. Don't start sticking herbs in your ears, but that's what Fergus took. And he was quite happy with it, and he let the Luba Corn go. And off went the Luba Corn out of this story, and you know he doesn't come into many others, but he's done his job. Well, now Fergus has got the herbs. He can go down to the bottom of any lake, and any river, and any stream, and any sea, all except one, because there was one thing the Luba Corn told Fergus before he let him go, and it was this: you can go to the bottom of any lake, any river, any sea, any stream you want, except one. Never, never, ever go to the bottom of your own Loch Rudriger, and it's for your own good, I'm telling you. And off he went, as I told you. Well, Fergus thought about it. He stuck the herbs in his ear, and off he went. He wandered around on the bottom of the sea, he wandered around on the bottom of the rivers, he wandered around on the bottom of lakes, and he gathered armfuls of magical treasures from land under wave. Well, you can imagine when he came back, next party Fergus has, next feast, he can say, to a king, "I've got this wonderful treasure here. I don't really need it. Would you like it?" And the king has to, the other local king has to accept the treasure, but he's not happy because he can't give Fergus a gift as good as that. So Fergus's status goes up, and the other local king's status goes down, and so it went on. And this helped Fergus to be a top king. And that's where our story ought to end. But it doesn't, because Fergus got bored again. I'm bored, I've got nothing to do. Well, there's one thing he hasn't done. He's never been to the bottom of his own Loch Rudriger. Now, should he do it? Maybe the Luba Corn was trying to keep the best treasures for himself. Or maybe he was telling the truth, and the bottom of Loch Rudriger was a very dangerous place. Well, Fergus took a chance, and off he went to the bottom of his own Loch Rudriger. And I'm afraid the Luba Corn had been telling the truth, because at the bottom of Lochrugaga there was a Pest. Now, a Pest is a water beast. It's not a dragon, because there really aren't dragons in Irish stories, and if you meet one, it's probably wandered in from another place. But a Pest starts off as an ordinary little wiggly worm that swims through the water, not doing any harm until you get close. And then it begins to expand, and it blows up like a bellows, and it goes huger and huger till a great snaking neck comes out of the water, and the fetid breath and the glowing eyes are enough to drive you mad. And that's what happened to Fergus. And he staggered out of the water back onto dry land. Now, you may have heard somebody say to you, don't make a face in case the wind changes and you get stuck. Well, it's not true, even if Granny'd sometimes say it, but that's what happened to Fergus. When he saw the monster, the look of fear on his face stuck. And when he came out of the water, you should have seen him. One ear was up here, one ear down there, one eye stuck out, the other stuck in, his nose was bent, his teeth were crooked, and he was covered in spots. He was hideous. And everyone saw him and went, oh no, have you seen Fergus, the state of him? He's so ugly. Oh, what happens if our storyteller poet sees him? He'll have to stop being king, and we want Fergus to stay king. He's great. We don't want him to stop being our king. So they went and saw the storyteller poet, and they explained the situation. And they said, we know that he's got a blemish now, he shouldn't be king, but can we bend the rules a bit? Because we do all love Fergus. And the storyteller poet said, yes. Because Fergus is a good king. We won't tell him he's ugly. And since all in those days, all they had for mirrors were things like this, polished metal, which you really can't see anything in. You don't get much of a reflection. And Fergus was highly unlikely to go down to the waters of Lochrugaga and look at himself on a calm day, so he never found out how ugly he was. But just to be certain, every day when the woman of the house or whoever brought him his water to wash in, she would bring him hot water every morning, and she'd froth it up or put a little soap in it so he wouldn't see his reflection in it. And that went on and should have been the end of the story. But it isn't. Because one day Fergus got bored, and he was so bored he started being very, very rude to the woman of the house who brought him his water. Take that water away, he said. It's too hot. Or maybe it was it's too cold, or maybe too wet. I've no idea. But the woman of the house was quite offended. She was no servant. She was just bringing his water for him. And she said, don't talk to me like that. You're ugly. Look at you. One ear's up here, one ear's down here. One eye sticks out, the other sticks in. Your nose is bent, your teeth are crooked, and you're covered in spots. You're hideous. Well, Fergus heard this, and he was shocked. But he went down to the waters of the loch, and he looked and saw his reflection in the water, and it was true. He was hideous. There was only one thing he could do. So he took his sword, and he went down, and the herbs, and he went down into the water. His people saw him go. One day he was gone, 2 days he was gone, 3 days he was gone. But on the evening of the 3rd day, the water began to froth. And then it began to boil, and then it turned red. And Fergus staggered out of the water. His face was clean and clear again. He had killed the Pest. Now, Fergus turns up in 1 or 2 other stories, but that's his most important story, and it's a very old story indeed. Now, Pest, you're never ever likely to meet a Pest in an Irish lake. Stories tell that there was once a Pest of some sort in every lake in Ireland, but they've all gone now because some hero or other, like Fergus, has killed them all. There is a story about a creature in a loch in Scotland, but I'm not sure that one's true. But it reminds us that there is still a lot of very strange creatures under the water, and always something new to find under the seas around Ireland and around the world. You could look up online and find some of the strange creatures that live under the water, like there's a clown frogfish. Look that one up, it's a very strange thing. Or maybe, the vampire fish, or the anglerfish, which carries a fishing rod round on its head. And lots of other very strange creatures indeed, like the Portuguese man of war, which is a pink and blue jellyfish, which sometimes turns up on the beach. Keep away from them. But you'll find out lots and lots of strange creatures. And maybe there really is treasure under the water, because so many things get lost that nowadays people can go down and find, even forgotten cities or wrecked ships. Look it up, because you could find enough things about what it's like under the sea to make your own wonderful hero stories. Well, I'll be back with another Irish story before long. But that is the story of Fergus McLeod.